I never thought a single block could feel like a falling star disappearing. One moment, her messages were there, bright and insistent. The next, nothing. I swiped through the empty chat like it could explain itself, and somewhere in that void, I realized I had already lost something I didn't fully understand. I was leaning against the counter of the little repair shop I worked at, the smell of motor oil and warm metal thick in the air, when she walked in. Not the first time, but every time her presence pulled my chest a little tighter. She had that effortless kind of confidence, the one that makes people notice without meaning to, mid-40s, sharp eyes, and a smile that could linger just long enough to make you hope it wouldn't. She carried herself like she knew every secret in the room, but her voice, when she spoke to me, had a softness I didn't expect, a gentleness that made the grease on my hands suddenly feel like it didn't belong there. "Still trying to fix that old transmission?" she asked, leaning slightly over the counter. The scent of her perfume mixed with coffee, strong, but subtle, and it made my stomach tighten. I shrugged, fumbling with the wrench. "Yeah," I said, and somehow that sounded smaller than I intended. She didn't press, just tilted her head, studying me like she was balancing curiosity and patience in equal measure. There was a pause, a long one, where neither of us spoke. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and outside, the rain tapped a steady rhythm against the windows. I caught her glance drift toward mine, and for a heartbeat, the room felt quieter, slower. My hands twitched as if they wanted to do something, anything, to make this moment less electric, less precarious. Then she did something small that made me notice her more than I should have. She reached over and set a mug of coffee beside me. No words, just the warmth radiating through the ceramic, the faintest curl of steam between us. I looked at her, and she looked back, and it was enough. Enough to make me aware of how aware I was of her. Enough to make me wish she'd stay a little longer, even though I knew I shouldn't. I wanted to say something, anything, but my throat tightened. "Thanks," I managed, and it felt like a whisper too loud in the quiet shop. She nodded, fingers brushing the edge of the counter as she turned, then paused and glanced over her shoulder, just for a second. That glance carried something I couldn't name, a flicker of something unspoken, and my stomach sank. It wasn't romance, not yet. Not really. But it was a spark, something fragile and dangerous, something that left me restless long after she'd gone. I found myself replaying the tilt of her head, the way her eyes caught the light, the tiniest shift in her posture when she lingered near me. Every detail settled in my chest, refusing to leave, like a song I couldn't stop humming. And even now, days later, after the block, after the empty silence on my phone, I can't shake that small act. The coffee, the glance, the pause that shouldn't have felt like a confession but did anyway. It's the one thing I keep returning to, the first evidence of something I can't name, the thing I'm not sure I ever will. I didn't expect to see her again so soon, but there she was, leaning against the counter like she belonged to the air itself. The repair shop smelled like motor oil and wet asphalt, and outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, painting the windows with streaks of gray. She had a box in her hands, a little fragile, the kind of thing you're not supposed to drop, and I could tell she was trying not to let anyone see how much effort it took. "Got a minute?" she asked, and her voice carried that familiar balance, calm but insistent. I nodded, stepping closer, already moving toward the workbench. She set the box down carefully, fingers brushing the edges as if it were made of glass. I noticed how her nails were short, practical, like she didn't have time for unnecessary luxuries. She didn't meet my eyes at first, and I realized she was tired. Her shoulders had that subtle slump, the kind you only notice when you're paying attention. I offered to help, and she hesitated. There was a flicker in her expression, something I couldn't place at first, almost vulnerability, but she quickly masked it with that usual composed smile. "I've got it," she said, but her hands lingered over the box for a beat longer than necessary. I didn't push. I just stayed nearby, hands in pockets, watching the way she moved, the way she breathed, the faint crease at the corner of her eyes, the slight tension in her jaw. She wasn't careless, but she wasn't as unshakable as she seemed. We worked in silence for a few minutes, her her carefully measured movements matching the rhythm of my observation. I caught her laugh once, soft, almost apologetic, when a tool slipped from my hand. She didn't look at me right away, but her eyes followed mine, and for a moment, there was something unspoken in that glance. "Thanks," she said finally, and it wasn't the polite kind of thanks. You could hear the tiny weight behind it. Something that wanted acknowledgement without asking for it outright. I noticed the way she wiped her hands on a rag afterward, the careful way she avoided smudging the corners of her nails. The faint scent of her perfume mingled with oil and metal, subtle but lingering, and I found myself leaning a little closer, not realizing it until her hand brushed mine while adjusting the box. That small, accidental contact sent a quiet shock through me, the kind you try to ignore but can't. She caught herself, stepping back slightly, and for the first time, I saw her hesitation, the tiniest falter in her composure. She quickly covered it with a joke about my clumsiness, and I laughed, but inside, I was memorizing the way her eyes softened for a second before she looked away. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged, like the pause before a storm. She didn't say anything, and I didn't either, but we lingered in that space longer than necessary. The air between us felt heavier, threaded with things neither of us would name. And when she finally moved to leave, she paused at the door, glancing back with that half-smile, brief, fleeting, and devastatingly gentle. My chest tightened. I couldn't stop thinking about the way she looked for that one suspended moment, the almost imperceptible pull she had on me, and the quiet energy she carried that promised something forbidden, something I wasn't supposed to touch, yet wanted anyway. The rain had started again, heavier this time, tapping against the windows with a rhythm that made the shop feel smaller, cozier, and somehow more dangerous. We were both there late, long after the usual closing hours, fixing a stubborn engine that refused to cooperate. I kept my distance, hands busy with tools, but I couldn't stop noticing the way her sleeves rode up just slightly, revealing a wrist I wanted to touch, or the way her hair fell across her face when she bent over the hood. "Pass me the wrench," she said, her voice low, almost distracted. Our fingers brushed, a fleeting contact, and I felt a small electric jolt run up my arm. I froze, pretending to adjust my grip, careful not to let my breath catch. She didn't acknowledge it, but I caught the quick lift of her eyes, just a flicker, and then she looked away. We worked in a silence that was anything but quiet. Every little sound, the scrape of metal, the faint sighs, the distant rumble of thunder, seemed magnified. My heart kept timing itself to hers without her knowing. I wanted to say something, maybe tell her that I'd been thinking about her smile, about the way she carried herself, about the way even a small pause when she looked at me felt like a confession. But the words stuck in my throat. Then her phone buzzed, sharp and insistent. I saw her stiffen just slightly, a brief flicker of irritation, and I realized it was a call she didn't want to answer. Maybe an old friend, maybe something more complicated. She glanced at the screen, debated, and finally silenced it. The tension that lingered wasn't just in the room anymore. It was between us, unspoken, layered with possibility. "Almost there," she muttered, and I caught a hint of exhaustion in her voice. Her hands were steady, but the subtle tremor betrayed her fatigue. I wanted to brush it away, to offer something, anything, but I kept my hands where they belonged. At one point, we bent over the engine together, shoulders brushing, knees accidentally knocking. I felt her breath close to mine, warm and real, and I had to fight the urge to lean just slightly, to see if she would. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second, and it was enough for a world of questions to rise between us, unasked and unanswered. A sudden knock at the door startled us both. A friend, probably, or someone from the shop upstairs, and we both flinched, the moment shattered. She straightened immediately, cool and composed again, as if nothing had happened. I kept my hands on the wrench, pretending to tighten a bolt, my chest tight and my thoughts tangled in the nearly there connection. As she packed up her things, I noticed her pause at the door. She looked back, eyes searching mine for a second that neither of us could, or would, claim. I wanted to step forward, to say something daring, to let the storm outside mirror the one I felt inside. But I stayed rooted, and she left, closing the door softly behind her. The engine sat silent in front of me, the room suddenly too quiet. My fingers itched to reach for her, to grab her hand, to let her know that I was dangerously aware of every inch of space between us. But I didn't. Not yet. The shop was quiet, the storm outside thinning to a drizzle, leaving behind that damp, metallic smell that always lingered after rain. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed, and watched her carefully place tools back into the tray. There was something different in the air tonight. Something heavier, like the kind of tension you don't notice until it presses against your chest. She paused, fingers lingering on a wrench. I noticed the way her shoulders slumped just slightly, the faint tension in her jaw that said she had been holding something back for hours. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words tangled up in my throat. Finally, she broke the silence, her voice quieter than I expected. Do you ever wonder what we're doing? It hit me like a cold draft. Not a flirtation, not a confession, but a question that carried more weight than any answer could. I looked at her, and she didn't meet my eyes. She kept her gaze on the tools, arranging them with careful precision. I realized she was trying to anchor herself, to act normal when nothing about this felt normal anymore. I don't know, I admitted, finally, my voice rougher than I intended. I stepped closer, but not too close. The storm outside rumbled faintly, as if echoing the uncertainty between us. She glanced at me then, eyes sharp, tired, and something else, something raw that I couldn't name. Because it doesn't feel normal, she whispered. And in that moment, it felt like she had stripped away every layer she wore, every carefully constructed boundary, and left me with just her, exposed and trembling. I wanted to reach for her hand, to say that I felt it too, that the pull between us was impossible to ignore, but I hesitated. Her vulnerability wasn't an invitation, it was a warning, and I didn't want to misstep. We stood there, the silence thick, each of us acutely aware of the spaces between us. I could see the faint line of fatigue under her eyes, the way her fingers flexed around the wrench, the tiny tremor when she exhaled. I was memorizing her, every detail, and it terrified me how much it mattered. I don't think I've ever not known how to feel about someone, she continued, voice breaking slightly. But this is different. Her glance flicked to mine, searching, unguarded for just a second before she looked away. The words hung in the air, heavy and unresolved. My chest tightened, not with desire, but with the ache of recognition. Recognition that we were both dangling at the edge of something neither of us could define or name. I swallowed, trying to steady myself. Neither do I said softly. She exhaled slowly, almost a sigh of relief, but it didn't ease the tension. It only made the quiet louder, the space between us more suffocating. Then, without looking at me, she muttered, almost to herself, and maybe I've been holding back for too long. I wanted to ask her what she meant, to push, to pull, to confess something back, but the words refused me. All I could do was watch her, heart thudding in a way that felt like it could shatter at any second. And as she turned toward the door, pausing for the faintest moment before stepping out, I realized something devastating. I had no idea if she was leaving me behind, or if I was already too far gone to matter. I didn't expect her to bring it up. Not tonight. Not in the quiet corner of the bookstore where we were shelving old textbooks. The air smelled faintly of paper and dust, the kind of smell that settles into your chest, the kind that feels like memory. She set down a worn notebook, fingers tracing the edges, and for a moment she didn't speak. I watched her in silence, careful not to interrupt the rhythm of her hesitation. I lost someone once, she said finally, voice barely above a whisper. It was a long time ago, but some days it still feels like yesterday. She didn't look at me, kept her gaze on the spines of the books as if they were safer than my eyes. I froze slightly, unsure what to say. The words weren't a confession in the way I expected, but something deeper, a fracture I hadn't noticed before. I didn't know, I murmured. My hands itched to reach for hers, but I stayed rooted, letting her unfold in her own time. She let out a soft, humorless laugh, shaking her head. Of course you didn't. Nobody does. Her fingers twitched over the notebook, as if holding on to it kept her grounded. It was sudden. She didn't get to say goodbye, and some part of me still waits for that moment. I swallowed. I wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the distance, but I felt the fragility of her walls. Instead, I let my eyes linger on her hands, the small knuckles, the way she pressed them against the notebook, and the quiet desperation there. It made my chest ache in a way I couldn't explain. I guess some people leave pieces of themselves behind, I said carefully, more to the silence than to her. And sometimes, you meet someone who reminds you of what you've lost, without even trying. My words hovered, tentative, and I wasn't sure if she heard the weight beneath them. Her fingers stilled. For the first time, she met my eyes, and I saw the flicker of recognition. Not of me, but of what I had said. She blinked, a subtle tremor passing over her face, the kind that made the air feel charged, like it could crack at any moment. "Maybe you're right," she said softly. Her voice wavered, a rare crack in the calm she carried so well. "Or maybe I'm just tired of holding on to shadows." I didn't reach for her, though every instinct screamed to close the distance. Instead, I stayed beside her, letting the moment breathe, letting her sorrow exist without trying to fix it. She exhaled, and the air between us shifted, heavier, quieter, but also intimate, in a way neither of us could name. Then she picked up the notebook again, flipping it open to a folded page tucked inside. A photograph fell out, faded, edges curling. I bent down slightly, catching it without meaning to. It was a woman I didn't recognize, smiling in a sunlit field, the kind of smile that could erase everything else in a room. She glanced at me, eyes wet but defiant, and whispered, almost to herself, "I wasn't ready to let her go, and maybe I'm not ready to let you in either." And in that quiet confession, something seismic passed between us, an invisible line drawn, trembling, and impossible to ignore. We found ourselves on the old rooftop of the building she'd come to fix a broken vent, the city lights blurred through the mist, and rain still clinging to the edges of the railing. Neither of us spoke at first. The night was quiet, apart from the distant hum of cars and the occasional drip of water sliding off the edge of the roof. I could feel her presence beside me, steady and deliberate, and it hit me how much I had been chasing these moments without admitting it. She exhaled slowly, shoulders releasing some invisible weight. "I think I've been holding my breath for too long," she murmured. Her eyes met mine briefly, then flitted away, scanning the skyline, as if the city could offer answers she wasn't ready to say aloud. I didn't reply immediately. I simply stepped a little closer, careful not to crowd her, letting the silence do some of the talking for me. I noticed the faint tremor in her hands, the way she adjusted her coat, how the sleeve caught slightly on her wristwatch. I realized I had memorized these details over time, each small quirk and subtle gesture weaving her into my chest. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted softly, voice low and hesitant. "How to let someone in without losing myself." I nodded, because I understood. "Neither do I," I said, the words plain, honest, nothing fancy. They weren't a promise. They weren't even a question. But in that quiet exchange, the truth of us, the fragile, complicated, inevitable truth, settled into the space between us. We stayed like that for a long moment, shoulders nearly touching, our breaths mingling in the damp night air. I didn't reach out. Not yet. I just existed there, beside her, letting the weight of proximity speak louder than anything I could say. And then, almost accidentally, our fingers brushed. It was just the slightest contact, the merest hint of connection, but it carried all the significance we'd been skirting around for months. She didn't pull away. I didn't push forward. We simply let it be, as if the universe had drawn a line we were both ready to follow, quietly, together. She leaned slightly against the railing, eyes on the horizon, and I matched her stance, close enough to feel her warmth but careful not to intrude. The city stretched below us, lights flickering like 1,000 tiny confessions. And in that silence, I realized that everything had shifted. There were no dramatic declarations, no perfect words to explain what had taken root, just an understanding, earned and mutual. A faint smile crossed her lips, so small it could have gone unnoticed, and I found myself returning it. No one had spoken, but the truth of us was unmistakable. It didn't need to be spoken. Eventually, she turned slightly toward me, and for the first time, I saw her completely. No masks, no careful composure, just the raw honesty we had slowly carved into the space we shared. And then we simply stayed there, side by side, fingers barely touching, breathing in the same quiet night. The storm had passed. The city hummed below. And for the first time, I understood that sometimes love doesn't roar or crash. It just settles quietly, irrevocably, in the spaces where two people finally decide to stay. It's strange, looking back now. The phone sits silent on the counter, the block long gone, and yet the memory of that emptiness lingers in the corners of my mind. I remember the sting of seeing her messages vanish, the quiet panic of realizing I had pushed someone I cared about away without even knowing why. And then, slowly, piece by piece, we rebuilt what had been broken, not with grand gestures, not with words shouted into the dark, but with quiet understanding and small, deliberate steps. She's different now, in ways I can't fully name. Less guarded, but still strong. The way she moves, the way she smiles, the subtle hesitation before she lets herself be completely seen. All of it tells me she's still learning, still holding parts of herself close, but willing to share them with me. And I've changed too. I've learned how to wait without losing myself, how to notice without pressuring, how to feel without panicking. Sometimes I catch myself watching her, not in obsession, but in wonder. There's a rhythm to her presence, a kind of gravity I can't fight. And she notices it too. The small pauses, the brush of hands, the fleeting looks. We don't need to label it. We don't need to define it. It just is. And maybe that's the point. Love doesn't always announce itself with fireworks or sweeping declarations. Sometimes it seeps in quietly, through moments you almost miss, through silences that speak louder than touch. I think about that night on the rooftop, the way our fingers barely touched, how the storm had passed but the city still hummed below us. That's when I realized love isn't about knowing exactly how or when it happens. It's about noticing the spaces between, the pauses, the hesitations, and deciding, quietly and deliberately, to stay. Looking back, I see the sparks that didn't seem like much at the time. The coffee she set beside me, the way she laughed softly at my clumsiness, the moments of near confession that almost went unspoken. They were all small threads weaving a tapestry I didn't understand until I finally stood beside her, not holding on too tight, not letting go too easily, just present. And in that presence, in that fragile, human, messy, unpolished togetherness, I think we both found something we weren't even sure we were looking for. Respect, patience, understanding, and the quiet reassurance that someone sees you, not just the surface, but the worn edges, the bruised parts, the little cracks. So now, when I think of that block, that silence, that fleeting panic of loss, it feels like a memory that taught me more than I could have imagined. Love isn't about control or perfect timing or grand gestures. It's about presence, patience, and the courage to feel without rushing, to hold without suffocating, to stay without expecting anything in return. And maybe that's the best kind of love, the one that arrives slowly, settles quietly, and leaves you better than it found you. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?